What's up, Dolphins? I'm Jim Grieshaber. Call me Grease. And as the Dolphins head coaching search heats up, the Pats and Bills are moving on in the NFL playoffs.
Hey, I'm Zgonina. One higher down, one to go. Let the circus begin.
Kyle Krabs, host Locked On Dolphins, very fired up about the hiring of John Eric Sullivan and excited to see what direction this head coaching search takes us this week.
Fins up. It's the Dolphins Squad. Everything Miami Dolphins, every week. Breaking down all the big hits and game-changing plays from South Beach. The way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. Sunshine, speed, and squad goals. The Dolphins Squad Show starts now.
Indeed it does on your Monday. I almost said Wednesday edition, guys. It's been a long week, but a long weekend of playoff football for sure. It's Grease, it's Z, it's Kyle. We got a good show for you today on your Dolphins Squad Show on the world's #1 podcast network, the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. And fellas, I was kind of wondering what we were going to talk about today. It's kind of one of those shows that produces itself, right? The head coaching search moves on. I've been very impressed with the methodology and how succinctly and clearly and on point the Dolphins have been so far, coming right out and hiring John Eric Sullivan as their GM, a guy with an extensive scouting and player development background, which is nice for the Dolphins. And of course, Kyle just did the show on Locked On Dolphins podcast on the 6 coaching candidates the Dolphins are reportedly talking to right now. So before we get too far into the show, I just want to see how our buddy Kyle's holding up, because not only is it a long weekend of playoff football, you can probably hear it in my voice screaming at the TV all weekend, but Kyle has been killing it here on the channel with everything that's going on. Your head's got to be spinning, buddy.
Yeah, it's busier than the in-season stuff, and you kind of had an expectation once you knew some change was coming, that there would be a lot of interest in what direction the Dolphins go, just because you could feel kind of the frustration and in some cases the apathy of the fan base. But the end of last week, just the overall interest that you felt for Miami and the investment of fans to want to understand who's John Eric Sullivan, what was the decision with Mike, and what candidates are out there. It's been not what you would hope for, because you'd hope for an exciting in-season from a content perspective, but it has been very fun to see everybody kind of get notice of what the Dolphins are doing and hopefully going about having a good process. And like you, I like how they've gone about their business thus far this past week.
Z, how about you? What are you? And I know your phone's got to be ringing. It's that time of year for you too, buddy, as you look to get back in the coach's booth or on the sideline. But what a week it's been. Your thoughts on what the Dolphins have done so far in this very, just the beginnings of the offseason.
Well, yeah, they went about the right way. They got their GM in, and now he's got to put a list together, for the ownership, along with the advisors. You're going to help him put that list together, and get a qualified coach in here. They have to figure out what they need. This GM's only been on the job since Friday, so he's got to figure out exactly what this team needs. They need an offensive coach or a defensive coach, or even, who knows, a special teams coach as the next head coach here. So they got to put that all together, and then start, putting out requests, which they did. They put 6 requests out, Kyle, if I'm correct so far?
Yeah, it's I think 4 formal requests and then like informal with Stefanski and Harbaugh's were interested, really. So it's like 6 total names attached to the vacancy right now, and they'll have more to go.
Yeah, I'm sure they will, and that's just how it goes. They'll get their people in, and and they'll talk to them, and then they'll whittle that group down to the second round and the big time interview, and then we'll go from there. So with over the next 2 weeks, it's going to be exciting. But again, like any coach's search for any team, once one guy drops for one of the teams, they start dropping fast. Unless you have a guy you really want and he's still coaching, then it drags. But until then, once the top dog, whoever that is this cycle, drops, then they start dropping.
I want to talk to you more, Z, of course, about John Eric Sullivan and those candidates and go through them with Kyle as well. But I've been watching a lot of the shows over the weekend, and a lot of the national analysts have said that the Dolphins job is the most attractive job right now. And in spite of all the futility, all the years of not winning playoff games, all the years of not really having a quarterback or a great head coach, that it's still the premier opening in the league over the Giants, and a chance to work with Jackson Dart over the Titans, and a chance to work with Cam Ward, and over a city like Atlanta with the Falcons. And, they still and I want to throw this to you, right back at you, because people still want to come to Miami. People still want to be in that weather. People still want that no state income tax. So it's still, in many people's eyes, the premier job. So let me put you on the hot spot here. If someone's calling you and you have your pick of any of these jobs as a head coach, Z, which one you taking and why?
Whoever's offers first.
Whoever's offers first? Okay.
I'm going to be honest. That's just,
For me,
that's how it is. That's how it was kind of as a player. I've never been in a position where I can wait on things, because once you wait, they move to the next guy. It's been, what I've learned and what I've seen over the years. I never was that guy that was like, oh, I can wait and go on this guy and that guy. Now, head coaching things are different. I get that. But for me, if somebody called me, okay, just tell me where to send my stuff, and that's where I'm going, because I'm not greedy and waiting. I take, the first person that wants me.
What do you think about that Dolphins job potentially being like the premier job for any coach right now? If you're Harbaugh and you have a pick, why would you pick the Dolphins? Would you think that he would? Would you think it'd be the premier destination for a guy like him?
I don't know. That's the thing. I question that with Coach, because, he's got to think of it. He's 63. Mm-hmm. This is his last go around. And, there's a lot of things that need to be cleaned up here in this organization. Does he want to put that time in? He's got to worry about a quarterback. Okay. He's got salary cap issues. Draft capital ain't as big as some of these other places, So, like I said, the cap, that's a big thing. You can't go out and get a quick fix on guys, and bring them in here right away, So, that's something he probably is thinking about. And that's why he hasn't said where he wants to go interview yet, because he's trying to get all that information and go about the right way. Which some of these other teams, they have draft capital. They have a quarterback. They have salary cap to go spend. It's a little more attractive. Unfortunately, the Dolphins don't have all those. Can't check all those boxes right now.
Kyle, you're coming to South Florida if you're 63 years old. Not only is there no state income tax on that $20 million a year he reportedly wants, but there's early bird specials everywhere, right? There's senior living complex. I mean, think of all the money that Harbaugh could save. No, I'm just kidding. But honestly, do you view the Dolphins, Kyle, as the number one job on the market right now? And if you're a coach, are you looking at where you can win first, or where you want to live and where your quality of life is best?
Yeah, I think you have to take into consideration, the personal and the professional and the team building. I don't think the Dolphins roster is the premier destination. Now, if you're looking at it through more of a long-term scope, Stephen Ross has always spent on his franchise. He's never afraid to spend money. You have a chance where if you come in and you hit it off with John Eric Sullivan in the interview process, you guys are starting at the same time. So if you go through interviews and you're authentically in lockstep on a lot of things, I think there's power in being organizationally aligned and having guys that are starting at the same time. I think that's part of where the Dolphins, have a chance to get it right this time, which they haven't really done. But I would agree that you look at some of the other places that have vacancies in their quarterback situations, the situation within the division and the competitiveness of some of those teams, and like what those schedule roadblocks are to postseason play. 2026 is going to be a foundational year. So if you're looking for a quick turnaround and you want to be coaching the playoffs next year, barring like a vast overperformance from the expectation of the team, Miami's probably not going to be the first or second out of your mouth in that discussion. But I do think an owner who has flipped his reputation when he first bought the Dolphins, he kind of had the reputation of being knee jerk and chasing Jim Harbaugh, right? And Tony Sprono's still under contract, and there was that whole pursuit and chasing off Bill Parcells when he was the football czar of the team. But what he's done in the past decade, he drew nothing but criticism for being too patient with a general manager, and he drew criticism for being too patient with his coach. So if you're going to be overly patient and you're willing to spend, if you look at it from a longer-term snapshot, that's where I think the Dolphins measure more favorably than some of these other teams. And not for nothing, there's only one team in the NFL with 5 picks in the top 100 of the NFL draft for 2026, and it's the Dolphins. Now, they don't have first overall pick. They don't have a highway to a first-round quarterback at their disposal. But it is worth noting, they have volume in the first round, and then their 6th pick's at 111. They didn't make their third pick last year until 143. So they do have meaningful draft capital. It's not just we have all the first round picks we could possibly want, use, and play with. And I don't know how mad I am about that, because the last time they had that strategy, they messed it up.
Yeah, and Z, you do have some pretty good young pieces to build around here. On the defensive side of the ball, you have some chips to build around, and then you have to see where Chop goes. It's going to be a huge year for him next year, make or break, if you ask me. But that left side of the offensive line, Jalen Waddle, Achane. I mean, you still have a lot to work with here for the right guy. The Dolphins are not by any means a complete teardown.
No, they're not, but they still don't have a quarterback right now. Okay, so that's the biggest issue. If you're in like an older coach, we just talk about. You want that. And plus those teams have a young quarterback, so it does not count against the cap like we have here in Miami. So you have a young quarterback, he's got a couple more years, so you have to go pay him that 5th-year option. Like look at Frisco. How'd they build that team for longevity? They had a young quarterback, right? Would cost them nothing against the cap. And they're able to build around. They're able to go pay the veterans, that they wanted to keep, and go get some to plug in and fill in because they had money. Now, when you have a quarterback that's counting a ton of money on your cap, it hurts you. You can't go out and sign, fill in the holes at cornerback or safety or, rush end or another offensive lineman or a tight end. It doesn't work because you have to pay the quarterback. And that's why, that's my only knock on this situation of hiring a coach here is a guy like Harbaugh may look at that and say, there's just no way, but if it's the only job, he'll take it. I guarantee you that.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens, and I'm always excited this time of year because it really is a carousel. Kyle, you said it best on your show, but we haven't done it yet. Let's just do that real quick with Kyle. Why don't you just run through the 6 names, Kyle, real quick? And if you haven't watched the episode yet, after you're done here, go back and watch Kyle's show or listen to it, download it wherever you get your podcast on the head coaching search and the candidates. But just for our purposes here, Kyle, real quick, so we can get Z's reactions.
Yeah, so we don't have confirmed interview requests, but these are guys that are not with teams, but it's former head coaches from this past year, John Harbaugh and Kevin Stefanski. Both of guys let go. They can interview in person at any time because they're not employed by a team. But then we also have interview requests in for 49ers defensive coordinator Robert Saleh, Packers defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley, Rams defensive coordinator Chris Shula, and they have already completed a virtual interview with Seahawks offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak. Seahawks were on a bye, so they snuck in a virtual on Saturday, which I think was the last day that they could be in contact with him until after the divisional round.
That's a mix, though, Kyle, huh? That's a mix of guys. That's some offensive guys, some defensive guys, a little bit of everything in there.
Yeah, so you've got 4 guys with some level of head coaching experience, too, with Harbaugh and Stefanski coming off of just this past year being on head coaching vacancies. Robert Saleh obviously had the tenure with the Jets. And then Jeff Hafley was a head coach for 4 years at Boston College and had them bowl eligible for 3 of 4 seasons before leaving. And he left because he didn't want to deal with NIL, and I don't want to be a recruiting coordinator and also be a fundraiser and be a head football coach and have to deal with all this. So he was like, I just want to get back to coaching football. It was like one of the first major coaching shoes to drop as a result of like this rapid shift that you saw in NIL was he just kind of threw his hands up and said, no, I want to coach football. So he left and has been with the Packers the past 2 years. So I think the experience of those 4 guys is notable when you consider the 4 head coaches that Stephen Ross has hired in his tenure as owner of the team. All of them were first-time coaches, and all of them were guys where you were kind of chasing a buzzy coordinator, right? It was Joe Philbin was, we want to bring the Packers offense to Miami and we want to run tempo, and oh, it was so cool. We put the offenses back to back on the same practice field to double our practice rep. Like that was the big thing. But he wasn't the play caller in Green Bay, and you didn't bring Aaron Rodgers with him. And it was Adam Gase got the stamp of approval from Peyton Manning, which I could probably be a great NFL offensive coordinator if Peyton Manning's my quarterback with what he does at the line of scrimmage and calling plays at the line of scrimmage.
Right.
And then Brian Flores off the Super Bowl win against the Rams. I mean, they had an outstanding run, and he's proven himself. Scheme was not the issue with Brian Flores. Just like him anyways, I don't think offensive scheme wasn't the issue with Mike McDaniel. So the fact that 4 of 6 have head coaching experience gets my attention a little bit.
All right, that's Kyle Krabs, host of Locked On Dolphins, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 podcast network in the world, and your team, your Miami Dolphins. Every day we're live on YouTube, then we upload, you download Spotify, Apple, iHeart, Stitcher, Podbean, and of course, we are on Roku as well. Going to take a quick break, do a couple spots for you, but on the other side, we're going to get Z's reactions to those names that Kyle mentioned, and we'll get his initial thoughts as the head coaching search moves on for Stephen Ross, Dan Marino, Troy Aikman, John Eric Sullivan, and whoever else is in there on it for the Miami Dolphins. They're doing a great job so far. I'm being glib, but I'm not complaining. It's Grease, Kyle, and Z. It's the Squad Show. Keep it right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I get a chance to talk to you about the good folks at Gusto. Go for the gusto, right? You always want to go for the gusto. I love that word, don't you? Let's be real. No one starts a business for the joy of calculating tax withholdings or managing payroll spreadsheets, right? That's where Gusto comes in, to take the stress out of payroll, benefits, and HR so you can focus on running your business and supporting your team. Gusto is the all-in-one remote-friendly payroll and HR platform that makes managing your team simple, transparent, and fast. Whether you're hiring, onboarding, or paying employees, Gusto helps you do it all from one place without the hassle or hidden fees. Unlimited payroll runs for one monthly price, which means no surprise charges at the end of the month. Their automated tools at Gusto, like offer letters, onboarding materials, and direct deposits, save hours every week. And knowing you can reach certified HR experts anytime gives you real peace of mind. So try Gusto today at gusto.com/LockedOnNFL and get 3 months free when you run your first payroll. That's right, 3 months of free payroll at gusto.com/LockedOnNFL. One more time, that's gusto.com/LockedOnNFL. Go for the Gusto on the Locked On Podcast Network. Sorry, guys, didn't mean to leave you up there. Didn't give you a break that time. It wouldn't come off. But Kyle Krabs, Jim Grieshaber, and of course Jeff Zgonina. Z, you heard the names, and of course I'll set you up here. Kyle did say it. A lot of head coaching experience, so there's always that kind of Go ahead, Kyle. But there's always that little balancing act that you're doing. Do you go with the proven commodity? Do you go with the guy who's been there, done that? Do you go with the guy who's done that and hasn't done it very well? But obviously with the Jets, maybe you don't hold it against the guy like Saleh. Or do you like to go in the direction of young, hungry, new?
I think he's got to look at the body of work of what they've done as a coordinator or as a coach, and where they've been and who's molded them. What tree are they from? I mean, that goes a lot into it. Like I say, we'll talk about Saleh. He's doing a good job out in Frisco again as a coordinator. He went to the Jets. And again, it was a messed up roster and building and everything. And does he really want to walk back into that down in South Florida? I'm sure he does, because he wants to be a head coach again. He wants another crack at it to prove, that his time the Jets was the Jets' problems, not his problems. And he wants to rectify that. But he's going to look at it and go, I don't know, because you always go back to Frisco and wait a year like Ben did, and wait for the next best thing next year. Not all these guys who are taking these interviews are going to take the job, especially if they don't want to, if they know it's their last time going through it, and it's hard to get a second and third shots at it, like, look, Mike McCarthy, he's only got 2 interviews lined up so far, I believe. Mm-hmm. He's a good coach. I worked for him. He's a good coach. He knows how to work a room. He knows how to use talent. He knows how to set a building up for success, because he's done it in 2 places, but he's only got 2 interview requests so far, so it's hard to get that third shot, especially if what happened with, the Raiders thing, my man had his third shot and it didn't go too well. You know what I'm saying? So, moving forward, and then you have, Halfley, I worked with Jeff, and he's a good coach. I think he deserves his shot at it. I really do. He went to college. He can deal with today's athlete, Not just, trying to get the right offensive coordinator. That's going to be the big thing for Half. He's a defensive guy. So all these guys we talk about, it depends who they get. Like, Sal's got to get a great offensive coordinator. He just has to. He's got to bring who's ever on his list has got to bring it to the table week in and week out for him, on that side of the ball. And same with Half. He's got to have a OC that is going to bring it, who's going to figure out what he has on the roster now with the quarterback situation, how he's going to fix that, who his quarterback coach is going to be. That's all got to play in for these defensive coaches, Same with Shula, when he comes, he's got to have that OC lined up. Now, all 3 of those guys are out of the same tree, basically, right? The Shanahan tree, the LaFleur tree, however you want to call it, it all comes back to that. McVay, he's a Shanahan basically disciple too, back in the day at the Redskins, So, it's going to be kind of the same. Who's going to be the coordinator? What offense are they going to run? It's going to be similar to what Mike kind of had here already. So that helps, those tree guys, whoever they get as a coordinator. And then who else we have on that list? I'm getting lost it here now.
Clint Kubiak.
Kubiak again, another tree from the Shanahans, right? The Kubiaks, right? I've known Clint when he was a little kid, and I played for Gary in Houston. I coached for Gary in Houston. I think Clint deserves a seat this year. He's a good coach. He comes from good stock. He gets it. He grew up in football. He's been very successful wherever he's been as a coordinator. So he's going to get a good shot at it. But again, who's his DC going to be? Does he keep Weaver? All these guys have ties to Weaver. Hafley was in Cleveland with Weaver. He could be keeping Weaver. Clint, we've played for his dad in Houston. I was on that team with Weave. That's how I know Weave. We played together in Houston. Saleh, they got the same. Well, they had the same agent at one time, so you could, Saleh could keep him. I don't know. These are all guesses on my part. So all those guys, they're all candidates. Just who their staff is going to be. That's going to be the big emphasis, especially if you're a defensive guy. Who your OC is going to be. How are you going to use what you have on roster right now, or what your needs are going to be to facilitate your scheme.
The biggest nets, great breakdown, Z, by the way, man. I'm sitting here in awe of that. And when I look at Shula, Kyle, I have to throw it out there. That would be the best story, right? I mean, the Hollywood fairy tale, if Shula were to come here and win a Super Bowl like Don Shula did, I mean, obviously the little stars are circling around my head right now. I'm in dreamland. But just the thought of that is interesting and compelling, right? To a Dolphin, is it not?
Yeah, I think you could probably do superlatives for all six guys, and the best story or like the most buzz that you could generate for a hire would be Don Shula's grandson, right? Like, I mean, come on, like let's get real. But at the same time, I would caution anyone who dismisses Chris Shula's resume strictly because of the name Shula. He's a very good coach, a good defensive coordinator. I like the fact that he didn't take any of the shortcuts coming up through his coaching ranks. He played at Miami of Ohio. He played with Sean McVay on that team. So he's known Sean McVay a really long time. But they kind of went their separate ways with coaching to start. He was a grad assistant in Indiana. He was a defensive coordinator at John Carroll. He got his first call to come to an NFL coaching staff in 2014 by the guy who was his position coach at Miami of Ohio, who also just so happens to be the Dolphins' current special teams coordinator. Craig Aukerman was his linebackers coach at Miami of Ohio and called him with the Chargers and pulled him up to be a defensive assistant. And he's been with the Rams since the year McVay became the head coach there. So McVay goes up, does all the offensive stuff with the Shanahans. Chris is in the college ranks, and he's been a linebackers coach, pass rush coordinator, defensive secondary passing game coordinator, outside linebackers coach, and the last 2 years has been the defensive coordinator for the Rams. And what I like about Chris and what I like about Jeff Hafley is both of those guys come from backgrounds. Chris with the Rams the last 3 years, and Hafley during his time at Boston College. They are very player development driven as far as their coaching, where Chris, they're 31st in the league in cash spend on the defensive side of the ball this year. They got a lot of guys on rookie contracts and a lot of guys you rewind and look back 2 years ago, UDFAs, day 3 draft picks. They had a lot of non-premium assets to help build a unit that was off the heels of Aaron Donald and Von Miller and Jalen Ramsey and Eric Weddle and like all the guys who were on that Super Bowl winning defensive roster. That transition happened, and they've developed those players in their program. And a lot of them have turned into very good football players, in which case they probably will not be able to keep all those players between what they've done on the defensive line with day 2 and day 3 draft picks. They just signed Quentin Lake, a day 3 draft pick out of UCLA, to a contract extension as the nickel there. He's become a very good player. And then Hafley, obviously at Boston College, they weren't a big transfer portal team at BC. They're trying to compete with these teams that have all this money to spend, and they're trying to develop their own talent. And he's told the story. He did an excellent interview with Adam Brenneman, who does a college football podcast and talked about the challenges of player development at BC and the transfer portal era and what that was like. John Eric Sullivan, you go back and listen to all the old stuff that he talks about in Green Bay, about their team building philosophy and whatnot. He says it's a young man's game. The draft is your lifeblood. That cost-controlled window of 3 to 4 to 5 years with players on rookie contracts, and how that is the fuel that feeds your roster. If that's the mentality that you're bringing in, and you contrast that to what the Dolphins have done the last 3 years, where they don't make any draft picks because they're paying him to pay a bunch, or trading him to pay a bunch of expensive veterans, and then they're signing a bunch of mid-30 veterans on one-year deals to kind of patch the rest of the roster together. That's a very different shift. And what your focus is in developing the players that you are guaranteed to have for 3 to 4 to 5 years, depending on where you draft these guys. I think there's alignment there in the school of thought from those coaches with their backgrounds and what they've done either in college or the pros, and what the new general manager has and has talked about. So as we're getting ready to push play on the coaching search and watch this thing really get rolling here, that's something that's in the back of my head with guys like that and their resumes, because I think having the same school of thought with a coach that's coming in and ready for the long haul with a GM that's been hired to be kind of the star of the show. This was the first hire that they made. They chose not to throw everything at John Harbaugh and give him the moon and promise him anything and everything from a player personnel standpoint. Being on the same page there is really important. And I think those are a couple of coaches that are on this list already that have shown with their body of work that they do that.
And Z, you talked about trees, that Green Bay tree. He's been there a long time, John Eric Sullivan, right? And you know his background in personnel and how versed he is in that, right? And the player development in Green Bay. I mean, look what they've done with their quarterbacks, those 3 in a row. It's been absolutely incredible to go from Favre to Rodgers to Love in Green Bay. And I know they have some issues there with LaFleur, and he's got another year left on his contract, and they want to try to keep him. But when you talk about that tree that he comes from, speaking of John Eric Sullivan in Green Bay, and you're talking about coming from guys like Mike Sherman, who learned from Ron Wolf, and that whole program there is about as solid as you get in the NFL. So I would think, I mean, and I want to hear what both of you guys have to say about this. I would think that player development will be at the very forefront, as opposed to even a Super Bowl winning pedigree. I would think that in these interviews, they're really going to be looking at that player development aspect of all these candidates. And then also, to your point, Z, you can't guarantee that everybody who interviews, you're not going to necessarily have your pick. You might want a guy and he might take another job.
Yeah, but I think you're correct on that, because again, the salary cap, they can't go out and get players. Like if you have a bunch of room, you can go and get players in spot film. So you have to get some teachers in the building, some guys that can teach fundamentals and technique to these young cats who are going to be playing for you on Sunday. That's yes, we're all coaches. Yes, that's our job. But you need guys that have track records, who have put guys on the field and have won with, not just saying, even if you have a first rounder, they don't teach a lot of technique in college anymore. It's pretty much about just go out there and run around. Be better athletes are going to win. I'm saying defensively, especially on the D-line play and everything, you get a lot of raw guys in the first round that you have to go out there and teach. They're drafted on potential in the draft. Once you get past pick number 5, usually, that's just how it is. So you have to get good teachers to fill in those holes that especially the Dolphins that are out there, because you can't fill every hole in year 1 because you don't have the room in the cap or the draft capital to do it. So, that's going to be one of the main things that hopefully going into this. So, the GM's got it all lined up where I want a teacher. I want to make sure your staff has a bunch of teachers on it.
Kyle, what does your gut tell you about John Eric Sullivan and his way of doing things when you look at that list?
I think you can look at their track record, and they like to go after guys that have extensive college career experiences. So they like mature players. They like guys that have a good track record of staying healthy. I think that's an interesting contrast versus what the phrase here in Miami the last couple of years is there's a 100% injury rate in football if you play long enough. And that's generally true. But by and large, I think that's one of the things you look at the roster construction for a couple of these Dolphins teams the last few years. There's been high-risk players, right? There's been players that have trouble playing a full season and being able to stay on the field for 4, 5, 6 seasons consecutively. And as a result, you can get those guys at a positive value from an at-cost perspective, but you're only providing value to the team if you're on the field, right? So it's weighing that out. So going younger, John Eric's, he's even talked about the way that you practice is different when you have young guys, when you have guys that have fresher bodies, when you're not focused on load management. And I know, I know Teron Armstead, and I've been on his program on his YouTube channel. But the first year he got to Miami, he had a toe injury in week 1. I don't think Teron practiced like a single day that whole season. He just was limited in practice, or he was a non-participant in practice, and he would get whatever shot he needed to get to suit up and play, and he would play on Sunday. As a guy who's coming in the first time playing for an offensive line, trying to develop chemistry with the guy next to you, that's hard, right? And you got all these combination blocks and these front changes and an offense like Miami's where there's shifts and motions and the picture's changing late just at the snap. And what's my assignment? Or, oh, I'm counting this guy's the first guy off the ball, or now this guy's the first guy off the ball based on they bumped all kinds of miscommunications can happen. And if you don't have guys that can stay on the field and practice with intensity and practice with the intensity that you need to really make the game easy, the way that they often talk about, you want to practice in order to make the game the easy part and the practice is the hard part. I don't think the Dolphins have had that luxury because their viewpoint has been, there's a 100% injury rate in football. So if we need to have load management, even for a guy like Darren Waller was a great story this year. Darren Waller had 2 IR stints. Darren Waller wasn't ready for the first month and a half of the season when you include the preseason games. So I think that's where, for me, the John Eric Sullivan school of thought is going to come into play here. And I absolutely think they have a surplus in draft capital. I would expect that they will keep that. I will expect they'll probably explore ways to add extra draft capital in 2027. Not to the extreme of trading Laramie Tunsil and Minka Fitzpatrick and getting 18 first-round picks and this and that, so that ESPN's got to have a soapbox session about how you're endangering the lives of the players on the field because they're not fit to play on an NFL field, like what happened in 2019. But don't get me started on that. But I do think they'll explore kind of having a long-term scope, and they should. And the good teams, once they get a surplus in draft capital, they kind of make strategic decisions to ensure that they sustain a surplus in draft capital. So if an opportunity comes around to acquire a player, they can do it. Or if an opportunity comes around to make a splash in this way, that way, but do so responsibly, they can do so without doing what happened to the Dolphins in this past build that they had, where they had these opportunities to make splashes and then they ran out of ammunition to reload the roster and it bit them in the rear end.
And they have a lot to work with, obviously, here in Miami. Just speaking of the tree, and I love that theme that Z brought up earlier. What tree does he come from? Well, that Green Bay tree has been pretty good. The Packers have only had 6 seasons at or below 500 since 2003, John Eric Sullivan's tenure there, and 16 times in the playoffs with a Super Bowl win, one of the premier organizations in the National Football League, the way the Dolphins used to be, quite honestly. It's Grease, it's Z, it's Kyle, it's your squad show on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, live on YouTube. Then we upload, you download the audio version, Spotify, Apple, iHeart, Stitcher, Podbean, and of course we're also on Roku, over-the-top television. We're going to keep it going. On the other side, the Dolphins looking for a head coach. The committee is working overtime as they get those interviews popping, and we'll keep it going with Kyle Krabs, host of Locked On Dolphins, and former Dolphin Jeff Zgonina on the other side right here on your Fins Squad Show. And I get a chance to tell you about our friends at Quo. QUO, like status quo, new year, new systems. This is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our business and think, hey, there has to be a better way. And there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades you can make. That's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo. QUO, the smarter way to run your business communications. Because when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, hey, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with your customers. I love how simple Quo makes everything, really. Your whole team can call and text from one shared business number, so nothing gets missed, right? That alone is unbelievable. Everyone sees the full conversation thread, which makes replies faster, more personal. It works right from your phone or your computer, and you can even keep your existing number with Quo. And Quo's smart AI tools automatically log calls, summarize conversations, and highlight next steps so details never slip through the cracks. It's no surprise Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses. from solo operators to growing teams. Make this year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. This is the year for you with Quo for free. You try it. Plus, you get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/lockedonnfl. That's QUO, quo.com/lockedonnfl for Quo. No missed calls, no missed customers on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. There we have it, fellas. Moving right along with your Dolphins Squad Show. I hope you guys are enjoying these breakdowns from Kyle and Z as much as I am. Z's been a player and coached 27 teams in the league. I mean, just this time of year, he's an old veteran with looking for jobs as a player and a coach. And then the breakdowns from Kyle, one of the best in the business. And Z, I know your phone's ringing off the hook. You're being tight-lipped about it. We were trying to get some info out of you before the show, but I know you're going to end up somewhere and we're going to lose you, and that's what you want, so I'll be happy for you.
Well, the phone's not ringing, so as of right now, you're stuck with me, Grease. So
maybe you could keep doing the show when, get another job, still do the show. What do you think?
No.
Can we talk to your coach, try to convince him?
You can do whatever you want, but
right.
In the contract is no. I'm not, a player you can, but not as a coach. That's that's the one thing.
You could be on the forefront of active coaches in their weekly podcasts.
Hey, you know what? Speaking of that, why were we at the Golden Globes winning the podcast award?
That's a good question.
A little bummed out about that last night.
Me too.
Who won it?
Huh? They gave a Golden Globe away for the best podcast.
Who won it? You remember?
Oh, I'll find out right now.
The comedian, she beat her ex-husband out, though. I know that.
Amy Poehler.
Yeah.
Won it.
Oh, Amy Poehler. Okay. Interesting. It's nice to see that be a category, though. The world's really changing. Insane, right? As we continue with your squad show, I'm just in awe sitting here. I mean, I read over the weekend, too, and I had a little laugh because of what I said last week. But Troy Aikman apparently was so impressive in the GM search as part of that panel. They're keeping him on to help find a coach, too, Kyle.
Yeah, it's well, it was good money to get, right? It's 5 days of work. I guess technically 4 days of work because they sent out the first round of interview requests on Monday morning, and by Friday morning it was announced that John Eric Sullivan had taken the position. So I will say this for Troy, and it sounds like he had a pretty steady hand in the Dolphins staying true to their preparatory work, right? Because they had 2 months to get ready for hiring process, and you heard some clues in reporting beforehand that they were intending to move pretty quickly with the GM hire. And midway through the week, the John Harbaugh thing happens, and then they put another request out for Chad Alexander, and everybody starts jumping to conclusions. But I appreciated the fact that you had this 2 months of prep. You very clearly had a type of a personnel executive that you were looking for. And despite the Harbaugh thing happening, the process didn't change for a shiny new object, right? Like, oh, this new thing is here. His name's Harbaugh. Stephen Ross wanted to get his brother all those years ago. He thought about getting him out of Michigan, but he didn't want to hire him away from Michigan. And they stayed true to that 2 month process and prep to go get the guy that I had been told on Monday that he was the lead dog in the first place by somebody that's a league source. So to know that they settled on the guy going into the process that was considered to be the best candidate, I think is good process. And whatever role Troy had in them staying true to that, obviously they felt the same way because Troy's back for however long it takes for them to identify head coach.
Yeah, and the committee's a good idea, right? I mean, everybody has things to add. You have a guy who's won Super Bowls, and you got Marino in there helping out too, as much as he loves the Dolphins organization, Z. So I've been really impressed with the way they've handled things, and as much crap as people have given Stephen Ross, so far so good on this GM and coaching search. And I really like John Eric Sullivan, solid player personnel guy. Kyle's been clamoring for this for a long time to have this kind of GM. And also, Z, to your point, and both of you have made the point on this show that this year the Dolphins get a head coach and a GM at the same time. They come in together. They're on the same page from the start. You're not hiring one who has to be accommodating to another one who's already there, and you're not just replacing one, then a couple years later replacing the other, and a couple years later replacing that one again. And this time it's all a clean start for everyone coming in as a result of what this committee's doing. And I think long term, obviously we've talked about it a lot here on the show, that's the best way for this organization to go, just to get that continuity from the start. Now, who knows if it's going to work, but to get that continuity from the start, I think gives them a way better chance of success.
Yeah, it sure does. I mean, again, like you said, they're both going to start day one new, and they're going to get it right because they're going to, they're both going to talk about what they wanted to do personnel wise and with the vision of this team moving forward, both offense and defensively. And that's going to help. You're not going to have a guy who's already in there saying, I want to keep this coach, I want to keep this player, and vice versa, because that does happen, when you have a mishmash of GM and head coach, This way it's all clean. It's a new palette, and they get a chance to set it moving forward, hopefully in the right direction.
Kyle, what about your thoughts on that, about that whole process and, the continuity from the start with these two guys?
Yeah, I think I don't think it's a coincidence that you often hear people talk about building a team and they talk about alignment and they talk about trust within one another. And it's really hard, right? Say Mike McDaniel was back and John Eric Sullivan comes in and he's going to want to take a long-term scope because he just got hired and needs to build the whole roster. And Mike's going to feel the pressure to win. Because Mike would be going into year 5 with 2 straight losing seasons. And what happens after a third losing season if they'd have kept him on and they had a losing season next year? What would happen. Mike McDaniel would be out, right? So that conflict, it just happened with the Raiders, right? I mean, Pete Carroll comes in, they hire John Spytek, but they hired those guys at the same time, and they still had organizational disalignment because Pete was, the moment he signed his contract, the oldest head coach in football, and Spytek goes back to playing at Michigan with Tom Brady. They were boys at Michigan together. You don't think John Spytek's got a little different sense of urgency than Pete Carroll does? And Pete Carroll's 74-year-old head coach who's back in the saddle after a sabbatical year. So in some ways, it's the opportunity cost of maybe letting some guys go that you might not want to in the grand scheme of things. That's part of the cost of having an organizational reset. But the fact that they've never had one under Stephen Ross, it was just, for me, and you go through the guys that they had the interview requests in, and you see 3 of them are 49ers guys, and each one of those guys has impressive resumes individually. But I was just worried off the jump when you saw a bunch of San Francisco guys knowing, okay, are they going to retrofit a GM to Mike McDaniel? And how does that go if there's a struggle, right? And then you ask yourself, did you get the right? It's just cleaner this way. It's a lot cleaner to have everybody start fresh, start anew, start in the same place. And I appreciate that they prioritize the executive because he's the guy who's going to pick the players. And then you can go through with the rest of the leadership group to say, who's the best coach to come in and help breathe the vision that we have for building an organization, thanks to this outside presence from Troy Aikman in the panel and Stephen Ross's son-in-law, Danny Silman, who's a part of the panel, and he's a very successful businessman. But he's new to the Dolphins' decision-making process. So there are some new influences. How does that fuel together, and how do you put it together? I think they've gone about it the right way thus far.
Kyle, let me ask you this. Excuse me, Grease. Let me ask you. So you say cleaner. So like you just said about the 49er potential GM hires, and Mike's ties. Now, would you want a cleaner where you don't bring a tie to Green Bay in? Or are you fine with bringing someone, that has worked with this guy already? Because that's the same thing that you just talked about with the 49er tree.
Well, I think that depends on what the feedback was. From what I understand, they asked every single one of the GM candidates that came in for their thoughts on what the path forward looked like with Mike McDaniel, what the path would look like without Mike McDaniel, and then which of those two pathways they wanted to work with or they felt they had a greater chance of success with. So it almost felt like they kind of used the GM candidates to kind of take the temperature check on, okay, we have what we think, and the owner has what he thinks about Mike McDaniel. What do the GM candidates think about Mike? Now, if those guys had felt that they were comfortable with Mike, then the only thing I'm worried about is if they'd have kept Mike McDaniel and tried to retrofit a new GM to fit with a coach that's entering into year 5. That's where I get worried about it being clean versus you can look at the body work in San Francisco and the way that they've built the team and the competitiveness that they have. They're clearly doing some things right. Same for Green Bay and all their franchises' success. So I'm less worried about influence from organizations as I am the pairing if the coach was going to stay on and be a piece of it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. No, I get it. I just, because, again, so, for me, so let's say I'm, the new GM and I bring a guy in from my previous job or a connection. Now the heater's really on me because I'm bringing a guy that I knew for a while. I'm sticking my neck out for him, blah, 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 It's at the end of the day, it's hard to go say, all right, after year 2 and, we're 2 and whatever and 3 and whatever,
Right.
and I got to fire him. You know what I'm saying? Because I've been in a situation where the head coach brought in a GM and that GM goes up and fires him. That's some sticky business there.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? And I don't want to be, hopefully in 2 to 3 years from now, we're having the same conversation here, and here we go again.
Right. And with that continuity, they have a real good shot at that. I have a couple more questions for Z and Kyle to put a bow on this one for this episode. And we have another episode later in the week here with your squad show. But a couple questions still with this head coaching search. And then we move on, talk about the games over the weekend, the playoff games. And one of us on this panel is undefeated. One of us, if you can tell by the smile on my face which one it is. One of us has picked every game correctly so far in the NFL playoffs, and one of us really hopes the Steelers win tonight so it can be a complete sweep. It's Grease, it's Kyle, it's Z. We're going to wrap it up on the other side with your squad show. Keep it right here. While I tell you, as the new year gets going, a lot of people are trying to simplify their routines, right? We all try it. Dinner is a big one. Between busy work days, cold winter nights, and packed schedules, having an easy, reliable dinner plan makes a huge difference. And that is where Home Chef comes in. Home Chef takes the stress out of cooking by delivering fresh, pre-portioned ingredients right to your door with easy-to-follow recipes that actually taste great. They're rated #1 by users of other meal kits for quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease. And it's easy to see why. The meals, they come ready to fit your schedule. 30-minute recipes, oven-ready trays, quick lunches, over 30 weekly options, including family-sized meals and different dietary choices. The recipes, simple, but they feel elevated, right? Even restaurant quality with dishes co-created by chefs like Gordon Ramsay. He might even yell at you. I don't know. Everything arrives pre-portioned, so there's less prep, less meals, and no wasted food. Saves time and money. Home Chef customers save an average of $86 a month on groceries. So 86, all that other stuff, and get going with Home Chef. For a limited time, Home Chef is offering our listeners and viewers 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. How can you beat that? You just go to homechef.com/lockedon. That's homechef.com/lockedon for 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert from Home Chef right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. There we go, guys. Wrapping it up. I want to get right to it because we have some playoff games to talk about, and want to get Z and Kyle's thoughts on Harbaugh. If Harbaugh wants the job, you just give it to him. I mean, we're talking about the Giants, Falcons, Titans, and Dolphins, and possibly the Browns as a sleeper for Harbaugh. I know we're not really caring about any of those other teams, but first you, Kyle. If Harbaugh wants the job, is it his? Period.
I think it depends. Like, are we going to start throwing conditions out there? And I want to control this, or I want the 53-man roster control. I mean, you just made a hire at GM, right? So I think if there's no hangups with the structure of the team, everybody's on board. He's the top available candidate in my eyes. So the resume is very strong. I wouldn't be worried about, he's only got a few years left. He might not be 38 or 42 like some of these really young guys that are getting head coaching jobs, but I'm not worried about he's 11 years younger than Pete Carroll, and Pete Carroll was coaching last year, right? So I think he's got a big enough runway, and the Dolphins have not had a successful enough stretch of hiring coaches for me to feel leery about, he might only have 6 years. 6 years would be twice as long as we've had for almost anybody that's been hired since Dave Weinstedt, right? Like it's on average, I think that is twice as long as the average coach has lasted. So Mike was the first one to make it 4 since Weinstedt, I believe. So if they deem it's a right fit in the interviews and he's receptive to the long-term process, then I think he's the best coach on the market. And you can never go wrong with making the hire of the best coach on the market. I would trust him to build a good staff. Feel very comfortable with that. He would have great facilities here. It's just, what is your desire to go about building a team? And if it's to have a rapid turnaround or start competing for playoff berths immediately in 2026, Miami might not be the best fit, but I would not compromise what you've already done in the way of going about a good process to hire a good GM candidate that'll had a lot of respect across the league. I would not cut him down for the knees just to get John Harbaugh in the building.
Z?
I agree with Kyle. I mean, it's got to be the right fit. He's got to fit with the new GM. Again, you went out, you get this committee together, you pick the right guy. Everybody's high on him. You can't just bring a guy in now and then, like, if he's demanding this or demanding that, I don't care who it is. I don't care, what coach on that, they bring in. He starts demanding. You got to move on, because we're not in the position for that right now, because we're starting new, we're starting fresh. If it's young, it's young. If it's old, it's old. But as long as everybody meshes together, and he's got the right vision for this organization moving forward to win games and win a Super Bowl, I'm all for it. But again, you can't come in and demand this and demand that. I don't care. I don't care who it is. It could be Newt Rockney, for God's sakes. But no, his GM has got to grow. He's young, he's hungry, and he wants it.
Who do you guys want? Who would you idea? Do you guys, each of you guys, have a favorite that you would like to see get the job? Z, Kyle, who's your clubhouse leader? Who would you like to see get the job?
Jeff Zgonina.
Jeff Zgonina, obviously. Yeah, I agree.
So that's a clean
Here's
sweep.
the thing. Let me ask you this. Why aren't we giving Anthony Weaver a shot? He's got a whole bunch of interviews lined up, in-house. I get it, you want to start anew and all that, but doesn't he deserve, at least a interview from his own team?
I would like to think they'll get there, right? Because they are, and I know with the way that the Rooney Rule works, you have to have two candidates from outside your own organization. So Anthony Weaver would not be a Rooney Rule qualifying interview, but we only have one request for an interview that is a Rooney Rule qualifying interview. So they're not done requesting interviews. They cannot be and fill the position if they want to be Rooney compliant. So knowing that, I would like to think that Anthony Weaver will also be a part of whatever additional requests go out. Not to say that Anthony Weaver is the best or the worst candidate for the job, but if I know they are not done sending interview requests out, they cannot be, to be compliant before doing a hire, Anthony Weaver would be on my next list of people to have on that request as well, to build a comprehensive. I think the Giants are up to they're in double digits for people that they've requested.
Oh, again, here's the thing. It happens because they're picking everybody's brain about their organization, their personnel, and everything. They want all these gurus to come through, and they want to pick it apart. And again, some of these interviews that are going on are also for OC jobs, especially guys that are not, or DC jobs, coordinating jobs. If you're not a coordinator, you're getting interviews. Sometimes that is because of you're getting interviewed to maybe be that guy here in the building. The GM is going to go to bat for you, with whomever the head coach is. Or the head coach said, hey, so this guy on this other team, why don't you bring him in and see if you like him? He might be a quarterback coach somewhere as my potential OC, Or if a team has been fired, you're getting a head coaching interview. Well, guess what? That could be for the DC or OC job also. There's a lot of games being played, as this goes on.
Kyle, do you have a guy? Do you have a favorite?
I haven't done enough to plant my flag in the ground for a guy, but I am really interested to watch the Matt LaFleur saga contract negotiation in Green Bay play out, where it was reported this morning that the Packers and Matt LaFleur, who's going into the last year of his contract, are going to try to come to a contract agreement extension. They both sides want clarity on what the long term holds for Matt LaFleur. And I know that they had a very unfortunate end to their season with the playoff loss in Chicago, right? And then 25 points in the fourth quarter and all that stuff. But Matt LaFleur, it sounds like there's a pretty wide gap on the dollars and the ask on what Matt LaFleur is asking for. You take the Aaron Rodgers years out for Matt LaFleur, it's still a 58% win percentage. It's still, they've had the top three youngest roster in football each of the last 3 seasons. They developed a quarterback that they got outside the first half, the first round, in Jordan Love under Matt LaFleur. And then when he was out, they completely changed what the offense looked like to run a different kind and style of scheme for Malik Willis, a quarterback who just so happens to be a free agent this offseason. So for me, a lot of the things that you've tried to achieve with your roster, I think Matt LaFleur could really optimize. It's been teased that, they might not be able to come to a contract extension. And if that's the case, then potentially it's a pretty rare, but it's happened. A trade could be on the table. I would want to explore that just as much as I would want to explore John Harbaugh potentially being the right coach in that regard. Now, I'm not saying I'm giving up a 1 and a 2 and the moon for Matt LaFleur. If that's the cost, then we'll go find somebody else to coach the football team. But, I'd be very much exploring that avenue if I were the Dolphins, especially because you did bring in John Eric Sullivan, who has all the overlap with Matt LaFleur in Green Bay.
Interesting. I like Kubiak. I think Z mentioned it earlier. I'd love to see Kubiak get the shot. His offense is fun to watch, man. The Seahawks, the third highest scoring team in the league, number 1 seed in the NFC. But the thing about them, and I think it's literally within 1 or 2 plays, the balance they have on offense between run and pass. I love their power running game. A tremendous balance. I think Kubiak could be a coaching star coming from Gary Kubiak and that tree. I mean, there's a lot there with Kubiak. I don't know. That'd be the guy that I'd want. All right, guys, we got about 5 minutes left here. And I just wanted to touch on the NFL playoffs because it was a big weekend, right? And those games were awesome over the weekend. The Rams were on the ropes as a double-digit favorite. They pulled it out. We talked about Chris Shula being one of the candidates for the Miami Dolphins. And, of course, you had a bunch of great games, the Packers and the Bears on Saturday night. Green Bay took the big lead early, and then the Bears coming back with 25 fourth-quarter points to win that one. Incredible job by the Chicago Bears. Then you had Josh Allen, 10 yards on the tush push on 4th down, and you get that 1st and goal, and the Bills put it away and beat a very good Jacksonville team on the road to move on. You get the Niners, another impressive win for Brock Purdy. And how about Shanahan and what he's done there? Just unbelievable. And then, of course, the New England Patriots were gifted a win by Jim Harbaugh, who didn't play his players in the final week of the season. And I knew the Chargers were going to come out looking the way they did, and unfortunately they did, because none of us want to see the Patriots go anywhere, guys. But what were your thoughts on the weekend of playoff football, Z?
Oh, it was good. Again, it was. I was impressed with Buffalo. I really did. Their defense actually did show up, and got them the win. Basically, they have had some ups and downs toward the end of the year in that defense, but they played very well. They got some turnovers, and Josh is Josh. I knew he had to win it, and he did it, and that was a great game there. And I thought every game was good. I'm looking forward to this Saturday though. These Saturday games are probably going to tell you who's going to be in the Super Bowl. You got the 49ers and the Seahawks, and then the AFC game is forgot which one that was, but I remember seeing it. I was like really excited about it.
Denver.
Buffalo, Denver.
Yeah.
And I'm excited for those 2 games this coming weekend, And then tonight we got one more to go, Grease. Tonight's a big game, and it's we could be talking on Wednesday of possibly someone else out there looking for a job, because you never know what happens in Pittsburgh, if they don't beat, if they get boat raced by Houston tonight, it could be a different story there,
Same thing to you, Kyle. Your thoughts on the weekend and then tonight?
Yeah, it's a bunch of great games, right? The first 4 games were really outstanding football games and back and forth, and it really kind of underscored what the DNA is of playoff football, where you are gonna don't beat yourself early, and then you're gonna get late in the game, and you got to go make some plays and win some football games. And you saw a bunch of guys that rose to the occasion across both conferences, whether that's Colby Parkinson and the touchdown catch that he had for the Rams against the Panthers, or whether that's Josh Allen and the short yardage push and Osiris Torrance getting behind him and pushing him for 10.5 yards on 4th and season, you name it. A bunch of great football games that were played. It was really entertaining. Caleb Williams and some of the throws that he made for Chicago down the stretch. Just really impressive stuff. The game tonight, still like Houston. I think that pass rush against Aaron and struggle to see how, unless Pittsburgh just shows up in a big way, and as far as their run game to move Houston's front off the line of scrimmage, I worry about their ability to separate on the perimeter and have guys that can help Aaron make some plays. But Aaron been around the block a time or two. He's going to be prepared for a lot of what he's going to see pre-snap and just go out and execute. And I'm looking forward to putting a cap on the wild card round.
Mike Tomlin hasn't won a playoff game since 2016. To whoever made the point, I forget which one of you guys, about maybe another job becoming available if the Steelers don't pull it off tonight against Houston. That's a long time without a playoff win in a place like Pittsburgh. And, of course, Aaron Rodgers, maybe his last stand. We saw Josh Allen pushed the Bills literally forward into the next round. We saw Brock Purdy do it for the Niners, Matt Stafford with an incredible job there. Does Aaron Rodgers have one more in him, one more run? They've won 4 out of 5 to get to this point, to win the North, to knock the Ravens out and make Harbaugh available. So maybe the Texans finish the job tonight and we see Harbaugh and Tomlin gone in the same season. That it wouldn't really surprise me all that much. All right, guys, real quick, we got to get going. And I know we have a hard out today for you, Kyle, but any final thoughts from you guys before we bounce?
No, just enjoy the ride. Because then right after this, we got the draft. Or no, free agency, then the draft. It's exciting times this spring, and I can't wait.
Maybe we'll have a coach by Wednesday, Kyle.
I'd be stunned if they move as fast.
And won't until next week.
Yeah, but at the same time, let's fill out that interview request list. Let's get twice the names on there, right? Like at this point, you better leave no stone unturned. Let's be thorough. Let's talk to as many as possible, and let's find the right fit. And as Z said, let's find some teachers to come in here and help build this program a little differently than what it's been tried to be run. And I think if they go that route, I'm going to be excited regardless of who they pick.
And for crying out loud, somebody hire Jeff Zgonina. We love you, Z, but we want you to get that job you want so badly, brother. I know that there'll be a lot of kids who will benefit tremendously from playing under you when you go to your next destination and we end up losing you in the long run. But thank you both. As always, excellent show from Kyle and Z today. Don't forget Locked On Dolphins podcast of all these same channels live on YouTube with this show. Then we upload, you download Spotify, Apple, iHeart, Stitcher, Podbean, Roku as well. And day in and day out, nobody does it better than Kyle Krabs on your Locked On Dolphins podcast. Z still does the Players Show as well. And I'm doing the Canes in the national title next Monday. The postcast is going to be great from Miami after the Canes just get that 6th natty. It's ready to roll in Miami. Can you imagine that building and that sideline that night? Oh, my God. They run this city when they win. The Hurricanes are back. All right, thank you so much for being here on your squad show. We appreciate you so much. Make it a great day. And as always, keep your game tight and your mind right.